as a result of it. And we're going to get into some of the details of what some of the powers are. But let's take a hands-on dive into S510, as it's affectionately known. The key points are that the FDA will now have the authority to issue a direct recall. That hadn't been the case in the past. In fact, all recalls, albeit pressurized, were voluntary in nature. That if there was a situation that took place, it was expected that the organization would do it. Well, now your fate is in their hands, and the FDA does have the ability to issue recalls. Food producers and distributors are required to develop written safety plans. They can't just be out there in the ethos. They need to be documented and not just maintained in a file. They need to be living, breathing, accessible documents that the government can get their hands on in case of an emergency. An interesting part that I caught note of, the Secretary of Health and Human Services will create a food tracing system, a national database collecting all sources and destinations of all lot-based inventory. It's going to mean that not only do we need to get to those records quickly, and I have a lot of customers who say, Jory, I can get into my files. It takes me 3 hours, and I can respond to that information manually. This is going to change that paradigm. There will be an electronic national repository of this information that will need to be standardized, that will collect specific data points. Obviously, it's not in place yet, but I'm certain that it is in the works and will be rolled out in the very near future. One of the parts that also caught me, interestingly enough, is that importers will be required to verify the safety of all of their goods as if they were domestically sourced merchandise based upon U.S. safety guidelines. And that's an interesting and very, very difficult thing to do. Certainly with the tremendous influx of imported food products, as we see here based upon this slide, looking between 1999 and 2009, we see a doubling of the imports of products. Well, that's going to double again based upon recent trends in the next 5 years, or 5 years forward from 2009. So we've got more products coming in, thanks to the world being flat. If anybody's a fan of the author Thomas Friedman, and the ability for countries to seamlessly move products and orders and merchandise and data, well, that means we're all importing tremendously. And we have to keep track of what's going on, and not only our own supply chain, but our vendor supply chain. So you can imagine if we're dealing with merchandise being brought in from China or Eastern Europe, knowing the suppliers of all of those ingredients, dealing with the supplier that you're purchasing from. There's going to have to be some effective measure, and going to have some traceability. So it's about know your customer, know your vendor. Know your vendor even better than you know your customers, because that's going to impact you tremendously. So let's talk about the specifics of who. Who is responsible? Well, what they're talking about is every organization who manufactures, processes, distributes, receives, even holds or imports an article of food. So it's anybody who's touching the merchandise within a supply chain is responsible for tracing source and destination. Trucking companies, freight forwarders, third-party warehouse, 3PL partners that you're working with, all will have to seamlessly coexist within the supply chain, being able to seamlessly move that information. I think electronic data interchange, or EDI, is going to play a very significant role in being able to transmit the lot-specific data that's going to be required. We'll also talk about warehouse management systems to effectively be able to capture that data at point of inventory, receipt, or movement, as well as periodic testing and checking that needs to take place. Additionally, what does the S510 bring to the table? Well, it authorizes the Secretary to suspend the registration based upon reasonable probability. You don't even have to have a problem. You just have to have a reasonable probability of a problem, and they can suspend the registration to distributors, but more importantly, they can prohibit the entire operation of the facility. So you can have one tainted product, one mislabeled product, let's not even call it tainted, one product issue, and they could prohibit the operation of the facility. So that is kind of sweeping power that they're going to have, and it did pass as of last night. So this is for real. How do you deal with this? Well, their expectation is it is your responsibility to evaluate the hazards within your own establishment, within your own business model. So they have the ability to suspend your registration and prohibit the operation of the facility, but it's up to you in terms of how you're going to evaluate the hazards that impact your business. And every business obviously is going to be a little bit unique. Then they want you to be able to identify and implement your own controls. That's an important part of the whole process. They want you to be able to monitor the performance of those controls. So we've established the control state, and we're going to now monitor that performance, make sure that we're adhering and we're in compliance with our own guidelines. And then, of course, we have to maintain records of the control monitoring. So it's not just we're going to keep several pieces of paper in a file that says, yes, we did check this incoming, receiving, we track these data points. There are some very simple tools that you can use to facilitate that. There's some great organizations. There's the SQF Compliance Initiative. You can check that out, which has a whole library of automated documentation that you can maintain. Should be a great resource. Being able to store that information up on a SharePoint site so that it's readily accessible and off-site in the case of any kind of an issue with your own facility. There's some interesting things that you can do there, but certainly important to maintain records of how you're controlling and monitoring it. The tools that will be at their disposal, well, they'll be able to assess and collect fees, and they said associated to the re-inspection process. I won't know what that really entails until we get some more details, and people, I'm sure, are pouring through this as we speak, but certainly they're going to be able to have some significant fees associated to any kind of recall problem. They can recall, as I mentioned, all products, and they can increase the frequency of the inspections, which they will most assuredly do. And what the FDA is planning on doing is establishing a pilot program for automated tracking and tracing of products. So we talked earlier about the concept of a national database, a repository of sources and destinations of all products. That is the pilot program that they're going to be discussing, and certainly we'll keep you folks up to speed with that information in terms of what data needs to flow to whom, how, and how often. And just by way of reference, we're doing a lot of this already with the USDA. I have some clients in the fresh meat and poultry industry, boxed veal, lamb, etc., and they are and have been for several years now sending under specific guidelines weekly information and updates in terms of who is purchasing what category, and that has to do with country of origin labeling, etc. But it wasn't such a daunting thing to deal with, but certainly something that needs to be dealt with. I figured it would be pretty good to give some definitions because not everybody's familiar with what they call Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 recalls. I just put some highlights out, and again, we get to that phrase, reasonable probability, that the use of or exposure to a violative product, one that is in violation of their standards, will cause serious adverse health consequences or death. So if you've got a real situation or a probable cause of a real situation, that is called a Class 1 recall. Class 2, situation which use of the exposure to a violative product may cause temporary or medically reversible. So if someone will get sick, they probably won't die, considered Class 2. And a Class 3 in which exposure is not likely to have caused an adverse health consequence. All three can result in a recall of product. Right? It's just to what level would your liability be, to what level is your entire facility at risk or exposure. And interestingly enough, in reading through some of the details, and I intended to put that into the presentation, but the information was coming in so late, was that mislabeling was one of the things that were most frequently cited that could be considered a Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3. So a simple act of mislabeling a product intentionally or just through accident or negligence is considered a significant violation, and I think that's pretty important. I do see a lot of that happening out there, and I think organizations are going to be wise to really keep more stringent control over that. And also, a market withdrawal can be put forth even if there is no class level associated to the process, but if there is evidence of some form of product tampering. Right? So we're all familiar, obviously, with the Tylenol or medicinal type instances, but that could be true of any food-related product, whether that's an inner plastic wrap, taped corrugated box that has been perforated, broken, or it looks like it was damaged, or any kind of insect access to the material. These are all things that have to be logged, accounted for, and seriously dealt with. So I thought those definitions would be important to put out there. So let's focus on some solutions. Let's focus on some basic strategies. Again, going back to the gentleman from ION Insurance Organization who put forth the fact that there's huge costs and potential liability associated to it, he suggested 3 things. Pre-incident planning. This subset of pre-incident planning, he said that the organization should set a food safety committee in place. CEO, general counsel, product and inventory managers, accounting and finance, all identified up front, sitting on a board, meeting on a regular basis to have incident planning contingencies created. Also involved in crisis management planning as well. Don't wait until there is a recall to know who you're going to call, when you're going to call, how quickly you're going to get that notification out. They said that getting on top of this, getting out in front of it as quickly as is possible. Now, obviously, we're not all dealing in the public domain here, right? Not all organizations are going to have the media attention that the typical type of recall that we see advertised or promoted through the evening news. Certainly not going to impact the day in, day out lives of what you folks are doing that are on the line today, although it possibly could. I still think there needs to be a crisis management planning team that's in place. The insurance companies are going to want it. The FDA is going to want it, so it's important to get that team assembled and put together. And then he also said you need to have a strict policy, a stringent plan in place for product traceability and being able to identify, as I keep mentioning, sources and destinations. So these are all key elements. So what can you do now? And now is really the time to think about doing it. I would suggest SQF documentation. I would suggest checking out HACCP guidelines, because the very same guidelines that are in place for hazard analysis and critical control points is what HACCP stands for, will be many of the same guidelines, at least from a procedural perspective, that you would have to deal with the FDA. I'm sure they'll have their own twist on it, but it'll give you a sense of what that's like. So if you can read on HACCP and SQF, that may be very, very helpful to you, and immediately implement documented internal testing standards. I know a few of the people online today that I'm familiar with have that in place, but we want to make that more formal, make that memorialized. Implement immediately traceability tools to help minimize or mitigate the impact of a recall. Certainly, if you're not lot-based within your inventory management systems, today you should be for tomorrow. A lot of distributors I work with don't think about that. Just think, like I said, it's the other guy's problem. I can tell where it went. I know about it. I turn my stock on a FIFO basis is something I hear all the time. So I have a general idea, but that general idea may do well for you to really trace it, but it's not going to do well for you to really prove it. And that's what the FDA is going to be looking at, and that's what this compliance is all about. A method to do that, inquire about warehouse management and scanning solutions, more affectionately known as WMS. This way we can reduce the time it's taking to record and log inbound materials by the warehouse staff or quality control teams, only to have that data reprocessed into some third-part form. Certainly having that fully integrated, that's something tangible MyBar can help you with. And, of course, making sure that your system has the comprehensive set of lot traceability, not just a crystal report or not just some cobbled-together report, but something that has real audit trail and real integrity, something that's going to stand up to scrutiny. We have many federally regulated facilities in the meat, poultry industry within our client base, and we have minimized their time it takes for them to satisfy the inspectors from hours and hours down to 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Case closed. That's true in the nutritional supplements industry. That's true of a variety of the industries that were more heavily regulated than just someone selling generic food products. So that was certainly very, very important. Managing customer expectations. What are they? Well, according to the interviews that we've done, is that you'll have unconditionally safe products from all of the supply chain partners. I don't know how many of us on this line could say, yeah, I have unconditionally safe products. I know who I'm doing business with, and more importantly, I know who they're doing business with, and I know that their traceability standards are up to snuff. May not be the case, and that's what they're saying consumers are looking for today. As I mentioned, responsible partners with that traceability, and most importantly, fast reaction and documented procedures. If you walk away with this from this session with